Hello, everybody. This is continuing the lecture on Unit 5. We had finished by covering the labor force, like who's in that, who isn't. We're going to move on to um, unions, labor, and how it interacts with business. And then I'll kind of cover this employment, kind of whole business and labor unit. So let's get to it. You see all these hands and the picket signs? The hands are showing the unity of labor forces. Let's see. Did I leave off the right spot? I did. Okay. Here you have all kinds of different people in the labor force, and definitely a post kind of COVID look with them all messed up here. All right. Interesting. And then here you see workers around the world united, and then picketing, taking collective action for improving um, working conditions, which usually means pay and hours and safety. All right. What are the basic principles of supply and demand in the labor market? The supply and demand issues are going to be pretty similar to how goods and services work in the marketplace, but not exactly, because now you're talking about people instead of things. So, what are the four categories of jobs? Where's the status of wage discrimination in the U.S. today? I don't know if it's exactly today, but it's pretty close. It's not as fair as it should be, I would say, is the kind of gist of it. What are labor unions and how does collective bargaining work? Labor unions are groups that work together to improve wages and working conditions. How does collective bargaining work? Members of these groups bargain together to improve these things. If they are bargaining individually, they'd have much less power, but by bargaining together, they're much more powerful entities. Because when you're bargaining by yourself, um, you might be able to be dismissed or ignored, but when you have a group with you behind you, it changes things. All right, supply and demand in the labor market. Labor demand. The higher the wage rate, smaller the quantity of labor demanded by firms and government. They don't need 50 CEOs, they need one. They don't need 50 CFOs, they need one. All right. Labor supply. By the way, CEO is Chief Executive Officer, CFO is Chief Financial Officer. So, labor supply. As wages increase, the amount of labor also increases. So as you make more money, more people want those jobs. It pays more. Then you have equilibrium wage. This is going to be just like equilibrium before. It's going to be the right wage. Wage raise produces neither an excess supply of workers nor excess demand for workers. The pay is correct. There's a recent increase to subpay and Lodi Unified because our wages were not competitive with neighboring communities. Now they're closer to that. I don't know if they're totally or not. I'd have to look at the details. What do we see here? Let's take a look at the picture. Uh, this is what used to happen. Kids would work in factories. These kids, young kids. I don't know what that kid's 4, 5, 6. Definitely not very old. This one's maybe 7 or 8, but they're both young and barefoot. So probably don't have a lot of money, or is that got one shoe, or I don't know. Just looks like it's in the textile industry. What I can see. Let's cover the next slide. Effective wage. All right. So let's say a new restaurant opens in your town, and they decide we're going to pay our cooks more money. Well, if they pay their cooks more money, then there's pressure on other places to pay their cooks more money. Otherwise, they might lose their cooks to this place. That's Smack Pie. I know it's a popular pizza establishment here in Lodi. Other restaurants raise wages to compete for scarce labor. So they don't want to lose their cooks, so they have to raise their rates. But the downside of this, those raises are going to be passed on to the consumers through price increases. So restaurants are going to raise the price of their meals to cover these costs of labor, and then the price of meals increase, consumer demand decreases, and so less people go to restaurants, and so they need less cooks. So it's kind of like this cycle. Wages go up, costs go up, demand for the products go down. Wages go, but if you don't ever raise wages, you're going to lose your most talented employees. Let's go ahead and write in some notes here. Hopefully, you follow that scenario. Yes, paying people more is good for them, but it might not be good for that particular market. And if you don't meet where other people are increasing their wages, then you might lose your entire staff. So you have to. And you also are going to have to charge more. So it's complicated. Wages and skills. Wages can vary according to skill and education. If you have a neurosurgeon, a brain surgeon, they're going to tend to be paid more because they have a high and unique skill, and they also have a high level of education. And there's not that many of that people that do that job really well. But economically speaking, labor workforce is divided into four categories: unskilled labor. These are people with no special skills required, other than the ability to, learn, follow directions, um, and improve. All right. Then you got semi-skilled labor, which requires minimal skills in education. Forklift operator. I learned how to drive a forklift after, I got the hang of it by 2 days. We were at this one job where forklifts had to be driven and operated. It's not that complicated. It, if you've been doing it a while, you do get better at it than other people. Um, and there are better people with forklifts than others. But it's learnable pretty quickly. That's why you need minimal skills. I don't know about any education. You can learn that on the job. Then you have skilled labor. Think mechanics, plumbers, I don't know, welders, people that, you know, jobs that most people would be uncomfortable trying on their own without the electricians. 'Cause, you really don't want to mess any of that up. Then you have professional labor where they have the most advanced skills and education, doctors, lawyers. Okay. I would think more accountants. Yeah, but teaching is not easy to do well, even though it's not that hard to do. Doing it well is what makes it hard, right? So, yeah, here you got someone raking leaves. That doesn't take a lot of skill. And you got people in the medical profession. And you got, I don't know what the heck that other thing is. Oh, is that a plumber? Yeah. You don't want someone wrenching on a pipe that doesn't know what they're doing. But definitely you want someone to fix your leak successfully. So look at the next one: wage discrimination. Unfortunately, people don't always get paid correctly. Um, and this has been going on for years. The Equal Pay Act of 1963 said males and females in the same workplace doing the same job should get the same pay. That you needed to pass a law like this meant they weren't getting the same pay. What happens is employers choose to pay men more than women for the same work. This is illegal based on this law. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 bans wage discrimination based on race. sex, they mean gender here, color, religion, or nationality. I think eventually sexual orientation or preference would be added to this as well. You're not supposed to do, um, you're supposed to pay people based for the work, not based on whatever group they identify with. Those are the symbols for male and female. And then you see some workers lined up together. More on wage discrimination. Pay levels for women. Even with laws, women are still getting about 75% of men's earnings. Why? There was this historic belief that men were the breadwinners. They had to take care of the family. But every working woman is taking care of a family, pretty much, whether it's just herself or herself and a husband, or herself and a husband and a kid, or multiple kids, or maybe parents. So the notion that women shouldn't be paid the same because they're not uh, taking care of the family, that's ludicrous. The person that most takes care of the family in most households is the woman. So that it's an insane logic. But it was the logic that employers used to discriminate financially against women doing the same work as male counterparts. In addition, if you were a racial minority, you would earn less than white. Men would get more than women overall, but white men would get more than uh, an African American or Hispanic man, and same for women. So it was based on not just gender, but also race, where there's a real discrepancy in pay for the same position. So they would get lower pay than white men. And we saw that in the last slideshow. And so they start calling it a glass ceiling, also, where not only are you getting less wages, there are positions you won't get promoted to if you're a person of color or a woman. And it really limited your ability to advance in a company or get the highest, most lucrative jobs, most high paying jobs. Women like men, only cheaper. So that's pointing out the wage unfairness. Let's take a look at this. See if we can look at this bar graph a little closer. All right. So I'm at a union job. So this racial and gender discrimination generally doesn't exist here because you're on a chart based on your education levels. So they have to slot you in. Now, it could be true, it could affect still hiring or people getting hired for leadership positions. I don't know or have any evidence of that, but I'm also not saying that that's not possible. Because the trends tend to be a national thing. And here you see people in the union, there's less of it. See the difference? People that aren't in a union, you tend to get more discrimination. So watch each video clip in the history of labor unions, then comment as directed. First one is the rise of labor unions. The second one is the labor movement in the United States. And you get a brief history of the unions. Okay? And then we're going to decide which video helped your understanding of unions most and why. All right, let's watch. It should be hot linked.
As America's industrial economy grew in the late 19th century, factories replaced farms, and workers struggled with long hours, low wages, and dangerous working conditions. At mills, mines, and railroads across the country, workers soon began to organize unions.
1870 is an important turning point. The census reveals for the first time that the majority of American men who work for a living work for someone else. So this old America of small businesses and farms is just starting to disappear. By the 1880s, things were moving very quickly and industrialization was underway. There were all kinds of new labor movements popping up.
One of the first attempts to create a national labor organization started in 1869 with an umbrella group called the Noble Order of the Knights of Labor. Unlike most other organizations that excluded women and certain types of workers, the Knights of Labor was open to almost everyone.
It's essentially a union of unions, and eventually has hundreds of member unions, eventually a membership of almost 700,000 by 1886, 1887, and it becomes a very influential force in trying to compel employers and politicians who have the power to regulate business to get them to adopt more humane working conditions, better wages, shorter hours.
The Knights of Labor is designed to protect workers' independence.
These are kids working in mines. Working in mines is extremely dangerous. This photo tells you a lot if you look careful.
And it's designed to be open to everyone. There are only 4 kinds of people who are excluded from membership in the Knights of Labor: bankers, lawyers, liquor dealers, and professional gamblers.
Though the Knights initially had lofty goals to reform the American economy, its power began to fade in 1886 after a railroad company squashed the workers' effort to strike. As the Knights' role in the labor movement was shrinking, another organization called the American Federation of Labor, or AFL, was gaining strength. It was led by cigar maker Samuel Gompers.
Gompers was a key figure, and he kind of stepped away from some of the visionary goals of the Knights of Labor, who really wanted to transform society in a lot of ways. And he said, really, it's about bread and butter issues. It's about short hours, higher wages, better conditions, and that's it. And the AFL was very successful in a lot of ways.
Successful and long-standing. After merging with the Congress of Industrial Organizations in 1955, the AFL became the AFL-CIO and continues to be a key force in the American labor movement today.
So I'm just taking a quick note on each one so I know, because I got to compare. Let's look at the second one.
So I've got my essay written, and I've been working on it for about a week. So now I'm going to show you how I use grammar.
Oh gosh, not Grammarly.
Get ready, because K-8 Science is here. GenerationGenius.com educates.
All right.
Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course U.S. History, and today we're going to discuss economics and how a generation of... Mr. Green, is this going to be one of those boring ones with no...
So this is gonna be way too long if that's the right one. I think that's the wrong video. Let's try this one. I think that might have been the old YouTube video.
To most of
right
us,
into the next
Labor Day
idea.
means time off from work, maybe a barbecue to mark the official end of summer.
There
But
we
how
go.
much do
That's
you
the right
know
one.
about what inspired its creation? The labor movement. The labor movement started around the Industrial Revolution, a time in the late 19th century when America exploded in size and wealth. Advances in technology created manufacturing jobs, and people moved to cities to work in factories. But it wasn't the workers getting rich. It was their bosses who raked in big profits by paying low wages for long hours. Fed up with big business, industrial workers created unions to fight for better conditions. Unions are the backbone of the labor movement. But what exactly did they accomplish? Well, for one, you can thank the labor movement for your work-free weekend. In the late 1800s, the
You didn't have a weekend for a long time. That's a big deal.
average American worked as much as 100 hours a week. Unions held strikes to demand shorter work weeks and an 8-hour workday to make time for family and relaxation. The most famous strike, the Haymarket Riots, happened in Chicago on May 1st, 1886, with thousands of people taking to the streets, and their voices only grew louder from there. The labor movement also protested child labor. Remember those black and white photos of children with dirty, sad faces wearing overalls and beanie caps? Those kids weren't playing outside, but they were working in factories. In 1881, unions demanded that businesses stop hiring kids under 14, and slowly but surely, measures against child labor caught on around the country. Eventually, all those protests got results. In 1938, Congress passed a law called the Fair Labor Standards Act, which set the 40-hour work week, regulated child labor, and set standards for minimum wage and overtime pay. In the 1930s and 1940s, workers were also able to negotiate health benefit plans from their employers. Though union membership is on a decline today, it's undeniable that the labor movement forever changed the way Americans live, work, and even relax.
Young people in large numbers.
Let's go to the next one. I think the notes is going to make it easier for me to pick which one I like the best, or which one I think helped me understand unions the best.
This is the checkers game where grandson and granddad will bond. This is the kitchen where the new boy...
The Pennsylvania AFL-CIO presents A Brief History of Unions. A long time ago, when our great country was just being built, there were the haves
money, money, money.
and the have-nots. The haves owned companies and industries, and they relied on their workers to, well, do the hard work. The workers were proud of what they did. They worked hard every day. But they watched the companies and the haves get richer and richer while they got poorer or stayed the same. They had to work for as long as their bosses told them to work. They didn't get overtime pay, they didn't get to take a break, and there was no guarantee they would be safe at work. If they got hurt or even killed, the company didn't have to do anything about it. This isn't fair! The workers decided to do something about it. But it was hard. The companies could just fire them.
Get lost.
So the workers joined in unity. Together, they had a voice. Together, they could demand things like fair wage, safe working conditions, an end to child labor, sick leave, family leave, pensions. Together, labor unions created something in between the haves and the have-nots, the middle class. The middle class is very important. It allows people to make better lives for themselves, and the middle class has money to spend, and when they buy things, that money goes back into our economy, and it makes America strong. Woo!
Okay. Which one helped me the most? I don't know. You figure that out. I'm going to go ahead and pause it, answer that, and then continue. I'll try to figure out how long it's going to take me to answer. Okay, so that took me about a minute to go ahead and finish that. Make sure you have it clear. Just having notes is not answering the question. So you have to make sure which one you identify as helping you the most. Let's go back to the notes. Let's see. Okay. All right. Labor unions. That's an organization of workers that tries to improve working conditions, wages, and benefits for its members. Bread and butter issues. Wages, working conditions, benefits. All right. Unions were responsible for great improvements in workers' lives in the early 1900s. But abuses such as feather bedding, which is preserving unnecessary jobs, and changing times have really led to a lot of questioning of unions and whether they're needed. I would say yes, they are needed because employers are always going to try to maximize profit, minimize costs. And that's usually at the expense of employees. So it's just the nature of the business relationship between employer and employee that necessitates groups like unions, unless they have somehow, some way, have extra bargaining power. Let's see if we can take a look at these visuals. AFL is the American Federation of Labor. We saw their video from Pennsylvania. CIO is the Congress of Industrial Organizations. I think one is more skilled than the other. Not sure which one. I don't know what's happening in this visual. I think you have people. I think a bunch of women are sewing. I think. I think that looks like sewing machine to me. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure. That's what I'm looking at. Let me do this. Let's see if we can make the photo a little bigger. Let's see if I can see any more. Like if you're in a situation like this and you've made a slideshow, but you're not really too happy with how you can see it, try to stretch it a little and then view it again. See if that helps. See if it's a little bigger. I think looking at that now, definitely looks like I see cloth in the middle. Yeah, I would definitely say that's the clothing industry. All right. Labor force trends. So you notice as women were fighting for suffrage, there was also this desire for a place in the workforce as well as fairness in the workforce. And it really started since the late 1800s as the corporations were at their most powerful. There's pushback by people working for them to get a little more fairness. But it's not until 1935, under the New Deal, the Wagner Act, also known as National Labor Relations Act, gave workers the right to organize and required firms to bargain in good faith, that real union and worker rights began, because you could be fired before then for just trying to bargain for better wages or working conditions. All right, so let's add our notes. So this is late 1800s. This is the height of the monopolies, the robber barons. U.S. Steel was still around. Standard Oil was still around. And this is going to change with the antitrust laws. Let's give workers rights to organize and bargain in good faith. Big deal. But it's important that if you're bargaining or even have to go on strike, to know that you're going to get hired back. My first year teaching, I participated in a strike. That was a big deal, but it also created a lot of unity amongst us. All right, more trends. You got blue collar versus white collar workers. When you talk about blue collar, you're talking about someone that more likely to wear a uniform. These are industrial jobs. They're often factory jobs, but they could be skilled labor blue collar jobs like a plumber, electrician, welder. These are traditionally union jobs. The more skill you have in those jobs, the more they tend to pay. Less skill, the less they tend to pay. I saw in the news that there's this shortage of truckers right now, and generally the market will try to correct those kind of things. Professional white-collar workers are professional jobs who often earn salaries, so you don't get paid by a clock. You get paid by the time you're in that position. They're traditionally non-union. Often they'll pay a little more than many blue-collar jobs, but not always. Jobs in the U.S. have been shifting a lot more to white-collar jobs. So the white-collar jobs tend to require a little bit more education. Blue-collar jobs can require significant training, though, as well. It kind of just depends on which sector. So you have a mechanic versus, I don't know, salesman or accountant. Shifting to more white, especially because we have a lot of jobs in the tech industry. Those are considered white-collar jobs, so it's kind of a shift. Although generally there's been a trend towards more service-related jobs in America. Let's go to the next one. Declines in membership. There are several factors that led to a decline in union membership since the 1950s. This is decline in union membership. Out here. And you see that in these right-to-work laws, which are basically anti-union laws. Taft-Hartley Act of 1947 allows states to pass laws banning mandatory union membership for a job. When you do that, you're giving people incentive to not pay dues to a union and yet still benefit from the union's bargaining for wages and better working conditions. So you're disincentivized financing unions, so it discourages what's the point of members, and then the unions can fall apart with these things. Economic, you're better off as a union if everyone's kind of made to pay dues to be in that job, because then you will, in the nature of things, bargain together, and you'll, in the nature of things, be better off. Unions tend to be strongest with industrial jobs, blue collar. These jobs are in decline, however, as many factories are closing in America. There used to be a huge auto industry. Now there's an auto industry, but it's less huge than it used to be. Um, the fulfillment of union goals. Some people felt that government and other organizations have carried out traditional union goals, ending child labor, improving working conditions, making things more fair. I think you could say that unions did this too, not really government. Government wouldn't have done it but for the unions. So that, I think, is putting the cart before the horse, and it's misinterpreting what has happened. But okay, but there is that feeling amongst some. All right, union membership in the U.S. In 1983, you had 20% of the workforce in unions. 2000, less than 20 years, 2000 was like 13%. 2012, it's like 30 years later, now you're down to 11%. So it's really been a steady decline on union jobs. Collective bargaining. This is the process in which unions and companies representatives negotiate labor contracts. What are they negotiating? Wages and benefits, working conditions, job security. You're talking wages and benefits. You're talking rate of pay, overtime, plan raises, and benefits. Employers don't want to give raises. Without pressure, they wouldn't do it. But here's what happens every single year. The cost of things goes up due to a thing called inflation. So if they don't give regular raises, basically you're giving people pay cuts because you're not meeting the cost of inflation. Work conditions. This is when you have the safety, comfort, and workplace issues. And some jobs that are dangerous were made safer. Job security. Primary goal for union is to secure members' jobs. Also deals with procedures for firing workers fairly, making sure they can get a hearing if need be. All right, let's go ahead and add to our notes. Let's see, negotiate labor contracts as required. Using wage rates, overtime, and raises and benefits. Okay. Working conditions. Talking about the safety, comfort, and workplace issues. The primary goal for union is to secure jobs, sure, and a process for fair hiring and firing. Strikes and settlements. Strikes are organized work stoppages designed to pressure management to address union demands. Sometimes management doesn't take unions seriously until we get into strike phase. But it hurts both workers and the firm. Because when you're on strike, you're not getting paid. And when you're on strike, the firm's not making product, or they're not teaching, or whatever, or they're not policing, whatever the case may be. Mediation is when a third party or neutral negotiator is called in to find an acceptable solution for the issues creating separation. Arbitration. If mediation fails, you get more formal. Mediation tends to be non-binding. Arbitration tends to be binding. And then it makes it a legally binding decision. And you're meeting with someone called an arbitrator who makes the decision for both sides. Often they're a lawyer or judge that's been hired to be neutral. This time, I'm not going to answer the quiz questions. I will show you how I'd start the answers, though. And maybe I will tell you what slide I would lean on. Supply and demand in the labor force. This one, it would be 38. If I'm going to write a number, I'm going to spell it out the first time. 4 categories of jobs are. Slide 40th list them. What is the status of wage discrimination? Wage discrimination persists in the U.S. as women make 12% less than men. Slide 42, I think, covers that. Labor unions negotiate for better pay, hours, and working conditions. And engage in collective bargaining to maximize negotiating employers. For employers. For improved practice. Basically what it is. All right, that's going to conclude this video. If you need to, pause it, do what you got to do to finish successfully. Thank you. Peace, peace, peace.